All right, welcome back again to Introduction to Sociology. And in this chapter, we're going to be talking about population, urbanization, and the environment. That's the title of the chapter, but we're mostly going to focus on population and urbanization. And in this first video lecture, we're going to focus more on introduction to the field that is the study of human population. That's called demography. So we're going to talk about that and then look at some global population data at the same time to kind of illustrate some things. All right. So without further ado, we're going to jump into a few slides that I'd like to cover with you. This is world population growth throughout history, and if you look in this week's schedule in Blackboard, you're going to see some videos that kind of illustrate various ways of thinking about global population. And there's one particular video, Human Population Through Time, that is really extraordinary. And you'll watch that either in class or in Blackboard. And this chart right here, it just illustrates that. But in the event you haven't seen that video, let me use this chart, excuse me, to highlight something here. So what we have is number of people in the billions over here on the left-hand side. By the way, this data comes from the Population Reference Bureau. Okay. So number of people in the billions, and we are, around right here. Let me turn on my laser pointer. We are around right here in 2021. Okay, 2021, 2022. About 7 billion people. Okay. And so, what the field of demography does is study human population, studies birth rate, death rate, fertility rate, crude birth rate, crude death rate, migration, population pyramids, and other dynamics of human populations. Okay. So there's a lot of reasons as to why we want to study that. And one major reason is to plan for the future. And in modern society, cities and communities, urban areas, rural areas as well, they plan for development. And it's an important thing to do because you need to make sure you can meet the needs of your population. And as we'll see a little bit later here, most of people on the planet live in cities. They don't live in small farms or rural farms, family farms. Most people live in cities. And so, demography lends way to the study of community and the study of cities, the study of rural and urban areas. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But coming back here to looking at global population. So, for thousands and thousands of years, we were well under 1 billion. And something happens around the year 1800 that causes the population to grow. Now, this is all based upon evidence, okay? And so, particularly since the year 1800, we have a really good idea about population. And so we know that this is accurate, but how do we know that this is accurate? And this is looking at projections of population. Well, how do we make projections? We're going to look at that in a moment. So this is remarkable. This is probably, in terms of slides that I show in class, this is probably the most, in my opinion, it's the most significant piece of information that most people don't know much about: global population growth. And so, there's several questions about that. How many people can the Earth sustain? Is it possible that we have too many people on the planet? And, based on what we talked about in the chapter on global stratification, what areas of the world are growing the most, and what does that mean for health, education, safety, security, democracy, birth, death, life expectancy, and all those things? That matters. We know that your level of development matters in terms of your your ability to survive at birth or how long you might live. And so, there's some serious implications of population and population growth. Okay. So, this is a, a pretty conservative, excuse me, conservative estimate, but it's interesting to think that if we're at about 7 billion right now, what is the world going to look like when we're at 11 billion? That's to say, I mean, these are all projections right here. That's to say that we level off at 2100 we level off in the year 2100. Some estimates see this continuing to go up and maybe, not as much of an increase. And I mean, theoretically possible that in the next 150 years, we could have double the population on the planet that we have now in 150 years. Now, that's not in my lifetime. It's not in your lifetime, but it's quite possibly in the lifetime of your children. What does that mean? It's an interesting question. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide here. This is the same data, but just presented in a different way. So you see, it took all human history to get to that first billion. And, I mentioned what happened in the year 1800 that really caused population to grow so fast, so quickly. And it's not just the Industrial Revolution, it's the innovation and development that comes out of the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. What is it about the Industrial Revolution that causes population to grow? Okay. And again, you'll watch additional videos on this topic as well. So here we go. This is demographic transition theories. We're going to spend a few minutes on this. And it could be, a little bit difficult to understand, but I'm going to try to really simplify it to kind of give you an idea, not just about demographic transition theory, but understanding human populations and why they grow, why they decline. Okay. So what you're looking at here is stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we have birth rate and death rate. Now, if you think about it in a population, the number of people that are born relates to the number of people who die, and that's how populations can grow or decline. If you have a really, really high birth rate and you've got a death rate where people die at a very late age in life, then that's going to cause population to grow quite a bit, and you're going to see that in just a second. The same token, if you have a very low birth rate and people stay alive for a while, then that actually balances out, and we have something called zero population growth. Now, Owensboro-Davis County is kind of an example of that. We've not seen rapid population growth in the history of the community. Now, you look at poorer places around the world, you see a different story. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So you have birth rate and death rate here passing through the different stages. Well, the stages you can see here have to do with the level of technology. What does technology have to do with human population? It has a lot to do with it. And it's not just technology, it's the type of culture. So what does culture have to do with population growth? Okay. Now then, we know historically in pre-industrial societies, and this ought to take you back to thinking about the chapter on culture, and even in the chapter on the economy, we talk about societies that are pre-industrial. And how do they get stuff done? How do they work? Who does the work? How do you do the work is a really important question to answer. Are you using technology to work, to make stuff for your family and your communities, to make stuff to trade, use technology, or to use human labor more so? Well, in pre-industrial societies, it's pre-industrial, so you don't have a lot of technology. So you use human labor, okay? And so that means that you need people around you, and that equates into having large families. Not only the need to have a lot of people in family to work, but also, people are not likely to live as long in pre-industrial societies because they don't have the kind of sophisticated medicines. So in those societies, population grows very slow because you have a lot of people being born, okay? A lot of people being born. And that's what these stages is. Up here, a lot of people are being born, but a lot of people are dying at an early age. So life expectancy in pre-industrial societies might be around 30 years of age. And you're kind of lucky to be able to survive after birth. So you have a lot of people being born, but people dying at a very early age. So it's very slow population growth. Well, then this is the example of 1800, and that's why you see the natural increase this way. In early industrial societies, so you've got cultures that are doing things the way that they always do. People in those societies, doing what they do and passing on that way of life to their children and to their children, right? And so when the year 1800 hits, Industrial Revolution, it's especially marked by innovations in medicine. So now, when people are born, we're able to keep them alive and they live longer and longer and longer because of medicines. Yet at the same time, people are still birthing a lot of people. It takes a while for people to catch up to cultural change. And in that period of time, you have rapid population growth. Now, going back here, and we've talked about this in the chapter on global stratification, you've got a lot of people and a lot of cultures on the planet that are still developing. They have very high birth rate, and as they continue to develop, people are going to be living longer. Oh, and by the way, if you're living longer here, what does that allow you to do? It allows you to have more children. So not only is birth rate really high, but now people are living longer, so birth rate actually gets higher, a little bit higher. Then we get into mature industrial and post-industrial societies. Whereas here, children and family size equals labor, and they do the work. Whereas in the United States, for example, children become a liability in some cases. Children are expensive. You have to raise children, you have to send them to college, you have to take care of them. And, in our society, kids can't go to work until around 14, 16 years of age. So they don't bring in income. So, children from 0 to 16 are not very productive for the family. And so we see birth rate really declining, and we see death rate declining as well, meaning people are living longer here, living younger here, but this bounces out to 0. Very slow population growth. And again, what makes this different than this is medicine. High birth rate, really high death rate, people dying early age. Death rate gets better in the sense that people live longer here, but the number of people being born is much lower here, and so slow population growth. Now, there's another dynamic that affects population. Right now, this is just looking at birth rate and death rate, and this is the demographic transition theory, and we see this in societies all over the world. You've got some societies whose population is exploding, and you've got some societies where population growth is very slow. Now, the difficulty of dealing with population is if it's changing rapidly, how do local governments, regional governments, nations, how do they keep up with the growth of more people being born? It's a difficult thing. Whereas in a society where you have slow population growth, it's a lot easier to manage those communities in terms of development and jobs and opportunities for people, because it's a relatively stagnant population growth. Okay. Now, birth and death are not the only indicators that affect population. Let's come back to this. So this should look familiar to you. And what we're talking about is population growth really exploding right here, right in this area here. Small population growth here, small population growth here. But it's because of the innovation of medicine really that affects culture. Where is population growth occurring? In the less developed regions. More developed regions, what's attributing to population growth in more developed regions is not so much birth rate, but migration. Okay? So people leave poorer places to go to richer places. Yet, the birth rate is so high in less developed areas, population growth is exponential. And it's occurring in Central Africa, mostly, and in Southeast Asia. Now, this is looking at a world population data sheet, okay? And this is going to highlight some terms in this chapter. So, what you're looking at here is the world, and we're looking at total fertility rate, which is the average number of children per woman, and infant mortality rate, the number of infants that die per 1,000 live births. So 1,000 children are born. What number of those die in the first year of life? Okay. Life expectancy is the expected years of life at birth given the current death rates. So this is looking at the world. This is looking at North America, which would include Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Okay. And this is looking at the continent of Africa. What you got to be careful about looking at the continent of Africa is that you've got every level of development on that continent. You got the poorer places and you got very rich countries on the continent of Africa too. But nevertheless, we're going to compare the world, North America, and Africa. And all of these are looking at total fertility rate, infant mortality rate, and life expectancy. So let me show you this. So ladies, if you live in Africa, you can expect to birth 4.7 kids in your lifetime. That's what fertility rate means. The average number of children that a woman can expect to birth. Now, in North America, that's 1.8, it's less than 2. And in the world, you can see it's here. This is quite common to see birth rate, fertility rate much lower in developed areas, much higher in less developed areas. Again, birth rate and death rate. Okay. Poor places have a lot more children because they have a tendency to die at an earlier age, and you need more people also to provide labor to help the family unit and the community survive. Infant mortality rate is here, and look at it in Africa, really high. That's unfortunate. And it's also expected because medical care and healthcare is not as developed or advanced in most parts of the world. Life expectancy. What you'll also notice is these are looking at 1970 compared to 2013. And you can see how much change there is, quite a bit. I mean, look at infant mortality rate, a lot of change. Now let's kind of look at this in isolation as an example in Africa. So if you live in Uganda, and this has changed a little bit over time, but if you live in Uganda, you can expect to have on average about 7 children on average. If you live in South Korea, probably the country that has developed the most over the last 60, 50 years, look at what's happened to fertility rate. It's gone from just under 6 to now about 1. And that's what happens. And the question I want you to ask yourself again is, how does culture affect things like birth rate? So how does the culture that I live in affect my decision to have children? And again, if it's difficult to raise children because it's expensive, it's kind of weird to think about birth rate as an economic, factor, or the economy as a factor in birth rate, but it is. That's quite clear. Okay. Again, where is population growth occurring the most? In Central Africa and then over here in Southeast Asia. Life expectancy, this is another reason why that projection of global population growth up to 2100 is that people are living longer around the world. And that's got to do with better health care. And you can see these comparisons from the year 2000 projected out to 2050. Now we're going to take a look at population pyramids. This will be the last thing that we look at before we end this lecture. So population pyramid. So here is a population pyramid in the world in 1970 and then the world in 2014. And what you're looking at in a population pyramid is you have the age on the left-hand side, and then you have the male versus the female population, okay? And so this is looking at the world, but this is a little bit more exaggerated when you look at different parts of the world. So let me show you something here looking at, again, Africa. So what this is saying that is in Africa, the the age cohort with the most people is 0 to 4 years of age, male and female. Most people in this place are 19 years of age and younger. So you ask yourself the question, in societies where you have a lot of young people, what do you do? Especially with babies. Compared to over here, and this is a really important economic, you know, fact. Look here, what are the age cohorts that have the most people? And you can see 20 to 24, and then up here 50 to 54 as well. Now, think about the lifespan. Really young people, babies, they require adult supervision, adult assistance to feed them, to change them, to take care of them. And then you think about what is the age cohort where you are your most productive economically to a community. So that age cohort is about 25 to 55. So if you've got a community that has most people that are 25 to 55, what type of economy do you think you're going to have? Probably more developed. And that's what you see here in these population pyramids. But if you've got a community where the population is mainly 10 years of age and younger, so the adults can't go out working, they've got to watch the kids. It's kind of hard to get your mind wrapped around that, particularly if you live in an area like Owensboro, Davis County, or even anywhere in the United States, pretty much. Most, just about all areas in the United States, most people that live in those areas are adults or they are very much balanced out according to age. For example, like this, pretty well evenly split across age groups. This here is difficult to get your mind wrapped around. What is it like to have so many young people around? Okay. It's like going to a daycare facility, but everywhere you go, there's all kinds of young people. At the same token, you can see that people don't live as long here compared to North America, developed area. Let me back up. You can see people are living much longer here. So population pyramids are quite valuable tool to use to understand population growth and population change, population dynamics. And that is going to wrap up the lecture on this portion of population. And we're going to continue on with another lecture or two soon. So thank you.